You know when you agree to something, but the second you start doing it, you instantly regret it? That's the experience I had every single time I agreed to go to my father's martial arts practice with him. After donning my white uniform and bowing my way onto the mat, I would come face to face with my exercise partner, Igor. It always was Igor. No matter if I attended on Saturday mornings or Wednesday afternoons, it was some sort of cruel joke that I would always be paired up with this 220-pound, 5'10" brick house of an Eastern European man who seemingly enjoyed roughly throwing around his friend's son. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is grandmas practicing Tai Chi with their friends in the park, and 10 is MMA Mortal Kombat, let's just say that Igor didn't spend much time with grandma. And so I would hit the mat hard every time, looking up, slightly dazed, cursing my decision to attend yet again. That being said, this wasn't all Igor's fault. The form of martial arts my father practices, Aikido, is strictly defensive, and the techniques taught focus on moving with the momentum of your attacker, never meeting force with force, blending with the movements coming towards you, using your center of gravity as a lever to direct the other's momentum to get them off balance so you can get away. Aikido is the type of art where, as Yoda would say, size matters not, where technique and calm beat muscle and strength every day. Watching Aikido masters practice, being attacked from multiple people from all directions, they stand as if in the eye of a hurricane, frenetic movement all around them, but they remain grounded, effortlessly flowing with each attack, dissipating them back into the roiling maelstrom from which they came. It's almost a dance. The aggression of the attackers is met with a stillness. The frenetic flurries of punches and strikes is met with simple moves. Someone comes to punch you, you simply step aside and direct them to the ground. The stillness and simplicity of the masters is no accident. If you're furiously moving, you cannot know where your body and another's will intersect. If you're rigid and tense, you cannot absorb the energy coming towards you with grace or ease. Through stillness, you find leverage. And through leverage, you find your power. You have to stop making waves to notice where the current might take you. So when I say it wasn't all Eeyore's fault, I mean it. He was simply redirecting my own force back onto me. Energy is never created nor destroyed, and Igor was the world's most thermodynamically observant sparring partner, which of course was a deep solace to me every time I hit the mat hard, trust me. This practice or philosophy of not meeting force with force, but effortlessly moving with its momentum, has deep roots in East Asian philosophy and religious traditions. Taoism, with its roots in China, began in the 3rd or 4th century BCE. And it called this way of being, of flowing with the movements of the world, Wu Wei. Now, Wu Wei has many different translations, and as with much of Taoist thought, it embraces paradox to a great degree. Wu Wei is acting without acting. It is effortless action. It is acting without meddling or interfering. Or how I like to think about it, Wu Wei is a baby exploring the world with their body, not trying, just doing. Wu Wei is when you forget yourself in the dance with a partner and you just flow. Wu Wei is when you let go of trying to say the right thing and the perfect words spring to your mouth. Wu Wei is Luke Skywalker bearing down the Death Star trench, voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi ringing out, "Use the Force, let go." And he doesn't aim, he simply pulls the trigger, sending his proton torpedo into the heart of the Death Star, not trying. Effortless action. Now, perhaps all of that makes complete sense to you, but if not, this parable might help. It comes from Zhengsa, the 4th century thinker credited with writing one of the most foundational texts in Taoism. It goes something like this. At the gorge of Lu, which is to say, a great waterfall that plunges thousands of feet. Its spray is visible for miles. In the churning waters below, no living creature could ever be seen. But one day, Confucius was standing at a distance from the pool's edge when he saw an old man being tossed about in the turbulent waters of the waterfall. He called to his disciples, and together they ran to the rescue of the victim. But by the time they reached the water, the old man had climbed out onto the bank and was walking along, singing to himself. Confucius hurried up to him. "You would have to be a ghost to survive that," he said. "But you seem to be a man. What secret power do you have?" "Nothing special," the old man replied. I just began to learn while very young and grew up practicing it, and now I am certain of success. I simply go down with the water and come up with the water. I follow it and forget myself. I survive because I don't struggle against the water's superior power. That's it. That's all. Wu Wei. Effortless action. How often do we fight against the currents of life, only to be left exhausted, trying to change other people, our feeble attempts to master and understand life, to feel in control, rather than practice one of the hardest skills of the spiritual life, which is humility? As Reverend Dr. Carl Gregg, a UU minister, explains, the Taoist worldview reminds us that all of us humans, whether sage rulers or just common folk, are merely one part of the massive whole of the cosmos. We humans are not special in the grand scheme of things, so we should be cautious to overinterpret what's happening to us as either good or bad in any sort of ultimate perspective. From the Taoist point of view, all that happens is part of a complex, intricate, larger whole, and we may or may not have the capacity from our finite human perspective to comprehend why things happen to us. As it says in chapter 58 of the Tao Te Ching, it is upon bad luck that good luck depends. And it is upon good luck that bad luck depends. Who knows where it ends? But in our Western white dominant culture, with the myth of living your best life, it seems like something that you have to achieve, have to fight for, something you have to do. And that once you do, you'll be able to experience only the good parts of life, the best parts, the good parts. But the Taoist perspective would, as Benjamin Hoff writes, laugh at this idea that somehow certain people could absent themselves from the nature of the universe, which is made up of both life and death, pain and pleasure, suffering and ease. But instead, Taoists focus on how to appreciate, learn from, and work with whatever happens in life. Appreciate, learn, work with. Not fight against, trailblaze, achieve, master, or understand. Appreciate, learn, work with. And when we're able to do such a thing, the natural result of this harmonious way of living is happiness. There is no best life, there is only life. And it is when we find ourselves resisting the very nature of life itself, be it the natural order of life or our inner nature, that we stumble into the deepest of sufferings. Sometimes we have to stop making waves, stop fighting against all that is, to find our place in the world. There's a Taoist story known as the woodcutter. A master carver made a bell stand of precious wood, and when he was finished, all who saw it were astounded. They said it must be the work of spirits. The Prince Lu said to the master carver, "What is your secret?" Seemingly a Taoist trope, asking that question. But the carver replied, "I'm only a workman. I have no secret. There is only this. When I began to think about the work you commanded, I guarded my spirit, did not expend it on trifles that were not to the point. I fasted in order to set my heart at rest. After 3 days of fasting, I had forgotten gain and success. After 5, I had forgotten criticism. After 7 days, I had forgotten my body with all of its limbs. By this time, all thought of your highness and the court had faded away. All that might distract me from the work had vanished. Was collected in the single thought of the bell stand. Then I went out into the forest to see the trees in their own natural state. And when the right tree appeared before my eyes, the bell stand also appeared in it, clearly beyond doubt. All I had to do was put forth my hand and begin. If I had not met this particular tree, there would not have been a bell stand at all. What happened? My own collected thoughts encountered the hidden potential in the wood, and from this live encounter came the work which you ascribe to the spirits. The carver needed to get out of the way. Sometimes you have to stop making waves to notice where the current of life might take you. So often we resist what life is throwing at us. We don't know what to do. In these past few weeks, with news of war in Ukraine, reports from the United Nations on the extent to which the climate crisis is unfolding already, I've noticed within myself and within our community 2 different responses. The first response is this urge to act, to do, to fight against, to rail. It's as if our anxieties within us whisper to us, if you don't do something, everything will be lost. But the other impulse, which I notice within myself and in our community, is a numbness, a dissociativeness, a disconnect. We can't quite connect in to all that is. Doesn't quite penetrate. Now, both of these reactions are our nervous system trying to deal with overwhelm, the overwhelm of the world. And sometimes we deal with overwhelm by trying to be in control, by acting, by doing. And it is through that acting and that doing, through the mastering and the achieving, that even if we don't know if it'll result in anything good, simply the act of doing can be enough solace to take that next step. Or sometimes not engaging, turning away is our way of dealing with overwhelm, because we can't bear to meet our own unknowing. Parker Palmer is a Quaker teacher and guide, and he spoke about his experience with depression. Now, one thing you should know about his story is he notes that there are many different types of depression, and everyone has their own unique journey. And so he shares his, not to say that if you experience depression that it will be the same. He merely shares it as the way he learned to work with his depression and not against it. Now, Parker had come from a long line of educators, and so he felt almost destined to follow in their footsteps. But as he entered adulthood and he did just that, he was struck with deep bouts of depression. Despite a successful career and a loving family and friends, he found himself in the quote, the dark woods of clinical depression, a total eclipse of light and hope. Writing about the experience years later, he said, depression demands that we both reject simplistic answers, both religious and scientific, and learn to embrace mystery, something our culture resists. Mystery surrounds every deep experience of the human heart, but our culture wants to turn mysteries into puzzles to be explained or problems to be solved, because maintaining the illusion that we can straighten things out makes us feel powerful. Yet mysteries never yield to solutions or fixes, and when we pretend that they do, life becomes not only more banal, but also more hopeless because the fixes never work. While working with a counselor, he found a way to embrace the mystery of his depression without trying to fix it, but also allowing him to reclaim his living. And it all started with a question from his therapist. You seem to look upon depression as the hand of an enemy trying to crush you. Do you think you could see it instead as the hand of a friend pressing you down to the ground on which is safe to stand. At first, Parker found the image in the midst of all his suffering impossibly romantic, even insulting. But it started to work on him. He realized that he had been living a life outside of his inner calling, that he had felt caught in the world of ideas about God rather than cultivating a relationship with God. That, quote, his inflated ego had caused him to think more about himself than was warranted in order to mask my fear that I was less than I should have been. Depression was, he writes, indeed a hand of a friend trying to press me down to ground on which it was safe to stand, the ground of my own truth, my own complex nature of limits and gifts, liabilities and assets, darkness and light. His depression was his true self trying to get his attention after shouts and taps, stones and sticks had failed to do the trick. He wrote, there was only one thing left: drop the nuclear bomb of depression, not with the intent to kill, but as a last-ditch effort to help to get me to turn and answer the simple question, what do you want? Parker was able to sit with his depression not as something to be fixed or an enemy to be fought against, but a friend. He wrote, embracing the mystery of depression does not mean passivity or resignation. It means moving into a field of forces that seem alien, but is in fact one's deepest self. It means waiting, watching, listening, suffering, and gathering whatever self-knowledge one can, and then making choices based on that knowledge, no matter how difficult. One begins the slow walk back to health by choosing each day things that enliven one's selfhood and resisting things that do not. It was not through fighting against, but moving with, that he was able to walk out of the dark woods of depression and continue his life's journey. Wu Wei. Effortless action. I wonder this week, how as you approach the challenges of your life, the challenges that we face in the world, that we might try a different approach, an approach that sets aside the urgency to act, to respond, to do, an approach that sets aside the immobility of inaction and simply tries to move with all that is. This requires a stillness, calm. It requires us to, instead of trying to manage and fight the anxieties within us that want to manage the challenges of living through quick answers, fixes, and solutions, but instead it invites us to simply sit with them. That these urges and pains are in fact teachers that might invite us into a deeper wholeness, that might be friends pressing us into the way of being that the world needs. Now, this may not be the approach for you. It may not be the right fit. And yet, as an antidote to our culture that tells us that how we're going to get forward, how we're going to make progress is by achieving, doing, mastering, and changing, we might find solace in a story that says you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything but be still and appreciate and learn from all that is, even the most painful realities of this world, including war and depression. And through that receptivity to what is, in stillness, we might be able to step aside and move. I went to the beach once, the ocean, and there was this kid, it must have been 5 or 7, who was at the water's edge. And every time a wave would come crashing in, he would karate chop the wave. Now, he was having a good time. It was all in a lot of fun. And yet, the waves kept coming. There was nothing he could do. Nothing he could do to stop the next wave from coming, and he could exert all of his force in the best karate chop action. And another wave would come nonetheless. Just down the beach, though, there were a few surfers who, on those same waves, would wait for the moment where the current would pick up and they would get to ride that wave way further than they could on their own propulsion. I leave you with those two images of the kid karate chopping into oblivion and those surfers effortlessly moving in harmony with all that is. May we too find our way in humility, in harmony.